The year was 1880, and the West lay sprawled beneath a merciless sun like a dying beast. Red dust rose in lazy spirals from the parched earth, coating everything in a fine layer of rust-colored powder that no amount of scrubbing could ever truly remove. The distant mountains stood like ancient sentinels, their peaks shrouded in a perpetual haze that made them appear more dream than reality. In the valley below, the small town of Bitter Creek huddled against the landscape like a collection of weathered bones, its wooden buildings gray and warped from years of exposure to the elements. The sound of iron horseshoes striking packed earth echoed through the main street, accompanied by the creak of wagon wheels and the occasional curse of a teamster. The wind, that eternal companion of the frontier, whistled through the gaps between buildings, carrying with it the scent of sage, horse sweat, and desperation. It was a sound that never ceased, a mournful howl that spoke of loneliness and hardship, of dreams ground to dust beneath the weight of reality. Clara Morrison stood at the back door of the Dusty Boot Inn, her slender frame silhouetted against the harsh afternoon light. At 19, she possessed the kind of fragile beauty that seemed almost out of place in this unforgiving land. Pale skin that the sun had kissed with a constellation of freckles, auburn hair that caught fire in the light, and eyes the color of prairie sage. But there was something in the set of her shoulders, a tension that spoke of burdens too heavy for one so young to bear. She gripped the wooden handle of a mop that had seen better days, its strings gray and frayed from countless scrubbings. Her hands, once soft and unblemished, now bore the calluses and cuts of hard labor. The dress she wore had been mended so many times that it was more patch than original fabric, its faded blue color a ghost of what it had once been. Inside the inn, the proprietor's voice boomed like thunder. "Clara, where in blazes are you, girl? These floors won't scrub themselves." Jonas Hartley was a man who seemed to have been carved from the same unforgiving stone as the landscape itself. Broad-shouldered and thick-necked, with hands like ham hocks and a face permanently reddened by whiskey and rage. He ruled the Dusty Boot with an iron fist. His wife had died 3 winters past, leaving him meaner than a rattlesnake and twice as likely to strike. Clara hurried inside, her worn boots making soft sounds against the warped floorboards. The common room of the inn was dim and smoky, filled with the acrid scent of tobacco and unwashed bodies. A few patrons sat hunched over their drinks, their faces hidden beneath the brims of their hats. They didn't look up as she passed. She had become as invisible as the furniture, just another fixture in this place of transient souls. "About time," Hartley growled, his small eyes narrowing as they took in her appearance. "You look like something the cat dragged in. Can't have you scaring off the customers with that hangdog face of yours." Clara lowered her gaze, having learned that meeting his eyes only invited trouble. "Yes, Mr. Hartley. I'll start on the floors right away. See that you do. And mind you get into every corner this time. Found dust under the bar yesterday thick enough to plant corn in." She nodded and set to work, dropping to her knees on the hard floor. The lye soap burned her already raw hands, but she bit back any sound of complaint. As she scrubbed, she could hear the whispers of the townspeople drifting in from the street. "Poor little thing. Mrs. Henderson was saying to her companion, used to be quality folk, the Morrisons. Had that nice spread out by Willow Creek. Drought got 'em same as it got half the county," came the reply. "Heard her PA died of the fever, and her ma followed not 2 weeks later. Broken heart, most likely. Still, to see her reduced to this, scrubbing floors like a common servant. World ain't got no use for sentiment," the other woman said with a sniff. "She's lucky Hartley took her in at all. Scrawny little thing that she is. Not much use for anything else, I reckon." Clara's cheeks burned with shame, but she kept her head down and continued her work. The women's voices faded as they moved on, but their words lingered like smoke in the air. She had been somebody once, the daughter of respectable ranchers, educated and refined. She could read and write, could play the piano, could speak French, but none of that mattered now. In this hard land, only strength and money talked, and she had neither. The memory of her family's ranch rose unbidden in her mind. She could see it as clearly as if she were standing there still. The whitewashed house with its wide porch. The barn painted red as blood. The fields of wheat that rippled like a golden sea in the wind. Her father, tall and dignified in his Sunday best. Her mother, humming as she tended her garden, coaxing life from the stubborn soil. Then came the drought. 2 years without rain. The earth baking hard as brick. The wheat withering in the fields. The cattle dying one by one. Their bones bleaching white under the pitiless sun. Her father's face growing more haggard with each passing day. The weight of failure pressing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. The fever had come with the autumn winds, sweeping through the valley like wildfire. Her father had been among the first to fall, burning up with delirium as Clara and her mother tended him with what little medicine they could afford. He died calling for rain, his cracked lips forming the word over and over until his breath finally stilled. Her mother had simply given up after that. She'd sat in a rocking chair on the porch, staring out at the ruined fields, and slowly faded away like a photograph left too long in the sun. Clara had buried her beside her father in the small cemetery on the hill, marking the graves with simple wooden crosses that were probably already weathering away. With no money to pay the bank, the ranch had been seized. Clara had walked away with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small carpet bag containing a few precious mementos. Her mother's Bible, her father's pocket watch, a silver locket with their photographs. Even those she'd been forced to sell one by one just to eat, until all she had left were her memories and the fading bruises of grief. "You missed a spot." Hartley's voice cut through her reverie like a whip crack. He stood over her, pointing at an imaginary stain on the floor. "Do it again, and put some backbone into it this time." Clara wordlessly dipped her rag back into the bucket and resumed scrubbing. Her arms ached, her back screamed in protest. But she continued the rhythmic motion, back and forth, as mindless as a machine. The afternoon wore on, the light shifting from white to gold as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. The saloon attached to the inn grew livelier as cowboys and merchants filtered in, their spurs jangling and voices rising with each round of whiskey. Clara kept to the shadows, moving between the tables like a ghost, emptying spittoons and wiping up spills before they could stain the floor she'd just cleaned. It was then that she noticed him, a stranger sitting alone at a corner table, his hat pulled low over his eyes. Unlike the other patrons, he sat perfectly still, a glass of whiskey untouched before him. There was something about his bearing, a quiet strength that set him apart from the rough men around him. His clothes were well made but dusty from travel, and when he shifted slightly, she caught a glimpse of a silver-studded gun belt. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, and for a brief moment their eyes met. His were the color of storm clouds, gray and intense, holding a depth of feeling that made her breath catch. Then, just as quickly, he looked away, pulling his hat lower and turning his attention back to his drink. Clara felt an odd flutter in her chest, a sensation she couldn't quite name. She shook her head and returned to her work, but she remained acutely aware of his presence, like a warm spot in a cold room. "Clara," Hartley bellowed from behind the bar. "Get in here and wash these glasses. Mary's taken sick again." She hurried to comply, grateful for the distraction. As she plunged her hands into the hot, soapy water, she caught fragments of conversation from the common room. "Heard there's a big rancher looking to buy up land around here. Got more money than God himself, they say. Keeps to himself mostly. Nobody knows much about him." Clara let the voices wash over her, focusing on the simple task at hand. One glass, then another, then another. Wash, rinse, dry. The repetition was soothing in its mindlessness. The stranger stayed until well past dark, nursing that single glass of whiskey. Several times Clara felt his eyes on her as she moved about the room, but whenever she looked his way, he was staring into his glass or out the window at the darkening sky. Finally, as the clock above the bar chimed 9, he stood and tossed a silver dollar on the table, far more than the price of a single drink. He moved toward the door with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, his spurs singing softly with each step. As he passed Clara, who was on her knees scrubbing at a particularly stubborn stain, he paused. She looked up, startled, and found herself staring into those storm-gray eyes once more. For a heartbeat, something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, though she couldn't say of what. His lips parted as if to speak, but then he seemed to think better of it. Instead, he touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect that no one had shown her in months, and continued out into the night. Clara stared after him, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't fathom. Who was he, and why did she feel, with absolute certainty, that this was not the last time their paths would cross? "Stop your mooning and get back to work," Hartley's harsh voice shattered the moment. "I don't pay you to stare at the customers." "You don't pay me at all," Clara thought but didn't dare say aloud. Room and board and freedom from starvation. That was her wage. And in these hard times, it was more than many had. She bent back to her task, but the image of the stranger's eyes stayed with her, offering a tiny spark of warmth in the cold emptiness of her existence. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the streets like a living thing, carrying with it the scent of coming change. In the distance, a lone rider made his way up the mountain path, his silhouette dark against the star-filled sky. If anyone had been watching, they might have noticed that he paused at the crest of the hill and looked back at the lights of Bitter Creek, his gaze lingering on the dusty Boot Inn. But no one was watching, and the rider, Luke Ashford, though none in town knew that name yet, continued on his way, his mind full of auburn hair and sage-green eyes, and a promise made long ago beside a river that still ran clear and true in his memory. The sandstorm came without warning on a Tuesday evening in late September. The day had been uncommonly still, the air thick and oppressive like a wool blanket pressed against the face. Old-timers in Bitter Creek had muttered about the unnatural calm, spitting tobacco juice and eyeing the horizon with the wariness of those who'd learned to read the desert's moods. Clara was in the kitchen of the Dusty Boot, her arms deep in greasy dishwater. When the first gust hit, the building shuddered like a living thing, windows rattling in their frames. Then came the sound, a roar like 1,000 freight trains bearing down on the town, accompanied by the sharp patter of sand against wood. "Storm's coming," someone shouted from the common room, and suddenly everyone was moving. Men rushed to secure shutters, stuff rags under doors, cover their faces with bandanas. The howling grew louder, and the world outside disappeared behind a curtain of flying sand and debris. Clara hurried to help close the shutters, her heart pounding. She'd weathered storms before on her family's ranch, but never one like this. The very air seemed to have turned solid, full of stinging particles that found every gap in the building's defenses. Within minutes, a fine layer of dust covered everything, turning the air inside hazy and difficult to breathe. "Get those lanterns covered," Hartley bellowed, coughing as sand filled his throat. "Last thing we need is a fire on top of everything else." Clara grabbed a tray of glasses from the bar, intending to move them to safety, but in the chaos and poor visibility, she didn't see the chair that someone had knocked over in their haste. Her foot caught, and she went down hard, the tray flying from her hands. The crash of breaking glass was barely audible over the storm's fury, but Hartley heard it. His face, already red from exertion and the sand-filled air, turned purple with rage. He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbing Clara by the arm and hauling her to her feet. "You clumsy fool!" he roared, shaking her like a rag doll. "Do you have any idea what those glasses cost?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Hartley. I didn't see." The back of his hand caught her across the face, sending her stumbling backward. Stars exploded across her vision, and she tasted copper in her mouth. "Sorry doesn't pay for broken property." He raised his hand again, but a voice cut through the chaos. "That's enough." The stranger from the corner table stood in the doorway to the common room, his gray eyes hard as flint. Despite the bandana covering the lower half of his face against the sand, his disapproval was clear. Hartley's eyes narrowed, This ain't your concern, mister. The girl works for me, and I'll discipline her as I see fit. The storm's the enemy here, not her." The stranger's voice was calm, but carried an undertone of steel. "Save your anger for something that deserves it." For a moment, the two men stared at each other, tension crackling between them like lightning. Then another massive gust shook the building, and a shutter tore loose somewhere upstairs with a sound like a gunshot. Hartley cursed and rushed off to deal with it, shooting one last venomous glare at Clara. The stranger approached her, pulling a clean handkerchief from his pocket. "You're bleeding," he said simply, offering it to her. Clara touched her lip and found blood on her fingers. She accepted the handkerchief with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. He studied her for a moment, those storm-gray eyes full of something she couldn't quite read. "You should put something cold on that. It'll bruise less." Then he was gone, melting back into the chaos as men continued their battle against the elements. Clara pressed the handkerchief to her lip, the soft fabric carrying a faint scent of leather and sage. She tucked it into her apron pocket, a small token of kindness in a world that had shown her precious little of late. The storm raged for 3 hours, though it felt like 3 days. Sand found its way into everything: food, water, clothes, even sealed containers. The air inside the inn became nearly unbreathable, and several men tied wet cloths over their faces just to filter out the worst of it. The building groaned and creaked under the assault, and more than once Clara feared the roof might simply tear away. When it finally passed, the silence was almost as shocking as the storm had been. People emerged slowly, coughing and spitting, to survey the damage. The main street was unrecognizable, buried under drifts of sand like red snow. Several buildings had lost roofs or walls, and at least one wagon had been overturned and half buried. Clara worked through the night helping to clean up, her body moving automatically despite her exhaustion. Her face throbbed where Hartley had struck her, and her split lip made it painful to swallow. But she didn't dare rest, not with Hartley's temper still simmering and so much work to be done. As dawn broke over the sand-scoured town, she noticed packages appearing, sacks of flour and beans, tins of preserved meat, even some precious medical supplies. They were left on doorsteps of the hardest-hit families, always before anyone was awake to see who brought them. The widow Martinez found bread and milk for her 3 children. Old Sam Tucker discovered a new blanket and a bottle of his heart medicine. At the Dusty Boot, Cookie the cook discovered their depleted pantry had been mysteriously restocked overnight. "Well, I'll be hornswoggled," he muttered, scratching his grizzled head. "Where'd all this come from?" Hartley was equally puzzled, but not one to look a gift horse in the mouth. "Don't matter where it came from," he grunted. "Just means we can stay open for business." Clara said nothing, but she remembered the stranger's eyes and the quiet way he'd moved through the room. She thought of the silver dollar he'd left for a single drink, the respect in his gesture when he tipped his hat to her. Could he be the mysterious benefactor? And if so, why? Over the following days, the whispers began. They started in the mercantile and spread through the town like wildfire, carried on the lips of gossiping women and speculating men. They forced the frail woman to scrub floors. "Mrs." Henderson said to her sewing circle, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Poor little Clara Morrison, reduced to such circumstances. And did you see her face after the storm? That brute Hartley marked her good." "She's got no one to protect her," another woman added. "No family, no prospects. What kind of life is that for a young woman?" "The kind she's got to accept," came the harsh reply from Widow Pearson. "World's hard enough without expecting fairy tales. She's lucky to have a roof over her head." Clara heard it all as she went about her errands in town, fetching supplies and delivering messages. The weight of their pity was almost worse than their scorn, at least when they'd ignored her. She could pretend she still had some dignity. Now she was simply an object of gossip, a cautionary tale told to young girls about what happened when fortune turned against you. That evening, As she knelt scrubbing the endless floors of the dusty boot, her mind drifted to happier times. She remembered summer evenings on the ranch, when the work was done and her family would sit on the porch, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. Her father would play his fiddle while her mother sang, their voices blending in harmonies that seemed to hold all the beauty and sorrow of the world. There had been a boy then, who sometimes came by with his father on business. Luke, his name was, though she hadn't thought of him in months. He'd been different from the other young men who came calling. Quieter, more thoughtful. He'd had eyes the color of storm clouds and a smile that made her heart skip in ways her mother had warned her about. The last time she'd seen him was the summer before the drought, down by Cedar River where the cottonwoods grew thick and the water still ran clear. They'd talked for hours about everything and nothing, skipping stones and sharing dreams. As the sun set, he'd taken her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "Someday," he'd said, his voice serious despite his youth, "when I've made something of myself, I'm going to come back for you. Clara Morrison, that's a promise." She'd laughed then, thinking it was just sweet talk, the kind of thing young men said to young women in the summer twilight. But there had been something in his eyes, a determination that made her believe he meant every word. Then his father had moved their operation to California, chasing some business opportunity, and she'd never seen him again. The drought came, her world fell apart, and childhood promises became just another luxury she couldn't afford to believe in. Wool gathering again? Hartley's harsh voice shattered her reverie. "I swear, girl, you're more useless than a screen door in a submarine. Get those floors done and then get to your room. I'm sick of looking at your moping face." Clara nodded wordlessly and returned to her work. When she finally climbed the narrow stairs to her tiny room under the eaves, every muscle in her body screamed in protest. She collapsed onto her thin mattress, still fully clothed, and fell into an exhausted sleep. In her dreams, she was back by the river, and storm-gray eyes were making promises in the twilight. But when she woke, there was only the darkness of her small room and the howling of the wind outside, carrying with it the taste of sand and the weight of another day's labor to come. Somewhere in the night, a lone rider sat atop a ridge overlooking Bitter Creek, his eyes fixed on the dusty Boot Inn. The stars above were brilliant in the clear desert air, but Luke Ashford saw none of their beauty. His mind was full of auburn hair and bruised lips, of promises made and the price of keeping them. He'd waited too long already, letting business and obligation keep him away. But seeing her again, seeing what she'd been reduced to, had awakened something fierce and protective in his chest. The mysterious gifts were a start, but they weren't enough. Not nearly enough. Soon, he thought, his hands tightening on the reins. Very soon, Clara Morrison would know that some promises, no matter how long delayed, were worth keeping. The merchant arrived on a Thursday morning when the October sky hung low and gray over Bitter Creek. Silas Blackwood cut an imposing figure as he stepped down from his polished carriage. A man of middle years with the soft look of someone who'd never known a day of hard labor. His clothes spoke of money, from his silk vest to his Italian leather boots, and his pale eyes had the calculating gleam of a man who saw everything in terms of profit and loss. Clara first saw him through the window of the dusty boot as she was polishing the glass. Something about the way he surveyed the street, like a king examining his domain, made her shiver. She turned away, but not before his gaze found her through the window. His lips curved in what might have been a smile, though it never reached his eyes. "Who's the fancy-dressed stranger?" Cookie asked, peering over her shoulder. "Don't know," Clara replied, though a sense of foreboding settled in her stomach like a stone. She found out soon enough. Blackwood swept into the inn like he owned it, demanding the best room and the finest whiskey Hartley had to offer. The innkeeper, sensing money, fawned over him like a dog hoping for scraps. "I understand you run a tight establishment, Mr. Hartley," Blackwood said over dinner, his voice smooth as oil. "Clean, efficient, well-staffed." "I do my best, sir," Hartley replied, puffing up with pride, "though good help is hard to find these days." Blackwood's eyes found Clara as she moved between tables. Serving the evening meal. That girl there, she seems competent enough. Yours? In a manner of speaking, she works for room and board. Orphan, no family, no prospects. Ah, Blackwood's smile widened. How charitable of you. Tell me, have you ever considered a more permanent arrangement for her? Clara's hands trembled as she set down a plate, but she forced herself to keep moving, to pretend she hadn't heard. But the conversation continued, each word driving another spike of fear into her heart. I'm a widower. You see, Blackwood was saying, my dear wife passed 2 years ago, leaving me in need of someone to manage my household. Someone young, trainable, grateful for the opportunity. Well now, Hartley said slowly, I suppose that depends on what kind of arrangement you're suggesting. Marriage, of course. All proper and legal. I'm prepared to be generous, shall we say, $500? For your trouble in training her, naturally. $500. Clara gripped the serving tray so hard her knuckles went white. She was being sold like cattle, her life bartered away over whiskey and cigars. She wanted to run, to scream, to throw the tray at both their heads. But where would she go? What options did a penniless orphan have? That's a mighty generous offer, Hartley mused. Course, she's a bit wild still, clumsy, prone to daydreaming. Might take some work to make her suitable for a gentleman like yourself. I'm patient, Blackwood assured him, and I have ways of ensuring compliance. A firm hand, properly applied, works wonders with the gentler sex. They shook hands then, sealing her fate as casually as they might have concluded a business transaction, because that's all she was to them. A commodity to be traded, a problem to be solved. That night, Clara lay awake in her narrow bed, mind racing. She could hear Hartley's heavy footsteps in the hall, the jingle of keys at her door. He was locking her in, she realized with growing panic, making sure his investment didn't run off in the night. She waited until the inn grew quiet, then crept to the window. It was a long drop to the ground, but there was a drain pipe within reach. She'd climbed trees as a girl. Surely she could manage this. She gathered her few possessions, a spare dress, the handkerchief the stranger had given her, what little money she'd managed to save from tips, and wrapped them in her shawl. The window stuck at first, years of paint and grime holding it shut. She pushed harder, muscles straining, until finally it gave way with a protest of wood against wood. Cold night air flooded in, carrying the scent of sage and freedom. She was halfway out when she heard the footsteps on the stairs. Her door burst open, Hartley's bulk filling the frame, his face twisted with rage. Going somewhere, girl. Clara didn't answer. She threw herself through the window, catching the drain pipe and sliding down, her palms burning against the rough metal. She hit the ground hard, ankles protesting, but she was up and running before Hartley could shout for help. The streets of Bitter Creek were dark and empty, lit only by a crescent moon that kept sliding behind clouds. Clara ran without direction, her only thought to put distance between herself and the inn. Behind her, she could hear shouts, the sound of boots on packed earth. They were coming for her. She turned down an alley, then another, trying to lose herself in the maze of buildings. But Bitter Creek was a small town, and there were only so many places to hide. Soon she found herself at the edge of town, facing the vast expanse of desert that stretched endlessly into the darkness. Without hesitation, she plunged into the wilderness. Better to take her chances with coyotes and rattlesnakes than with Blackwood and his firm hand. The ground was rough beneath her thin shoes, full of rocks and thorny plants that caught at her skirts. But she pressed on, driven by desperation and the growing sounds of pursuit. The chase led her along a ridge above Cedar Creek, the same river where she'd once sat with a storm-eyed boy and believed in promises. But the drought had reduced it to a trickle, its banks steep and treacherous in the darkness. She was looking back, trying to gauge how close her pursuers were, when the ground crumbled beneath her feet. She tumbled down the embankment, rocks tearing at her clothes and skin, until she landed hard in the shallow water. The cold hit her like a physical blow, driving all breath from her lungs. She tried to stand, but her ankle gave way, sending her back into the icy stream. There she is! Lights appeared on the ridge above, lanterns carried by Hartley and his men. In moments they would be down the bank, and she was trapped, injured, with nowhere left to run. Clara dragged herself to the far bank, seeking shelter under an overhang of roots and rock. She pressed herself into the shadows, shivering violently, trying to make herself invisible. The water had soaked through her dress, and the October night was cold enough to see her breath. She clamped her teeth together to stop them chattering, afraid even that small sound would give her away. The men climbed down carefully, their lanterns swinging arcs of light across the water. She came this way, Hartley growled. Saw her clear as day. Check upstream. They spread out, boots splashing through the shallows. Clara held her breath as one man passed within feet of her hiding spot. She could see his face in the lantern light. Tom Bradley, who worked at the livery stable. He'd always been kind to her, tipping his hat when they passed on the street. Now he was hunting her like an animal. Maybe she doubled back, someone suggested. Maybe she drowned, another voice added hopefully. That water's mighty cold. She ain't drowned, Hartley snarled. And when I find her, she's going to wish she had. Blackwood paid good money for her, and I aim to deliver. They searched for what felt like hours, though it was probably less than one. Clara's hiding spot saved her, but the cold was becoming an enemy just as dangerous as the men. She couldn't feel her feet anymore, and a strange lethargy was creeping through her limbs. She knew she needed to move, to get warm, but her body wouldn't obey. Finally, the search party gave up, climbing back up the bank with promises to return at first light. Clara waited until their voices faded completely before crawling out of her shelter. She tried to stand but fell immediately, her legs refusing to support her. The world seemed to be tilting, darkness creeping in from the edges of her vision. She managed to drag herself a few feet up the bank before collapsing completely. The stars wheeled overhead, beautiful and indifferent to her plight, so this was how it would end, frozen and alone by a dying river. Just another casualty of the harsh frontier. I'm sorry, she whispered to the night, though she wasn't sure who she was apologizing to. Her parents, perhaps, for failing to survive. Or maybe that long-ago boy with storm-gray eyes, for not being there when he came back to keep his promise. The darkness was almost complete when she heard it, the soft sound of horse hooves on sand. A figure materialized from the shadows, tall and solid against the stars. Strong arms lifted her from the ground, and she caught the scent of leather and sage. Easy now, a familiar voice murmured. I've got you. It was the stranger from the inn, though in her delirium she could almost imagine it was someone else, someone from a summer evening long ago. She tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't come. The last thing she remembered was being wrapped in something warm, a coat that smelled of campfire smoke and safety before the darkness claimed her completely. Luke Ashford held the unconscious woman against his chest as he guided his horse through the darkness. He'd been watching the inn, had seen her desperate flight and the pursuit that followed. Fury burned in his chest at what he'd overheard, Hartley selling her like property, that merchant's casual talk of ensuring compliance. But anger could wait. Right now, Clara needed warmth and shelter, and he knew just the place. His line shack up in the hills was well stocked and hidden, a perfect refuge until he could figure out their next move. Because there would be a next move. He'd make sure of that, as his horse picked its way carefully through the desert. Luke allowed himself to look down at the woman in his arms, even half frozen and unconscious. She was beautiful, though that wasn't what made his chest tight with emotion. It was the courage he'd witnessed, the desperate bid for freedom that had driven her into the night rather than accept a fate others had chosen for her. I'm sorry I took so long, Clara, he whispered into the darkness. But I'm here now, and I swear, nobody's going to hurt you again. The mountains loomed ahead, offering shelter and secrecy. Behind them, Bitter Creek slept uneasily, unaware that the game had changed. Come morning, Hartley and Blackwood would discover their quarry had vanished like smoke, and by the time they learned the truth, it would be far too late to matter. Clara woke to warmth and the scent of pine smoke. For a moment, she lay still, afraid to open her eyes and find herself back in the dusty Boots' cold attic room. But the bed beneath her was soft with real blankets, not her thin mattress, and somewhere nearby she could hear the crackle of a fire. Memory returned in fragments. The flight through darkness, the icy water, strong arms lifting her from the ground. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking in the soft morning light that filtered through a window. She was in a cabin, modest but well-built, with walls of fitted logs and a stone fireplace that radiated blessed heat. Clean curtains hung at the windows, and shelves lined one wall, stocked with supplies and books, actual books, their spines gleaming in the firelight. It had been so long since she'd seen books that tears pricked her eyes at the sight. "You're awake!" The voice came from near the fire, and Clara turned her head to see the stranger from the inn. He sat in a rough-hewn chair, whittling something with slow, careful strokes. His hat was off, and she could see his face clearly for the first time. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and those storm-gray eyes watched her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as a croak. "Safe," he replied, setting aside his whittling. "About 10 miles from town, up in the hills. Nobody knows about this place except me." He rose and moved to the stove, where a pot simmered. The economy of his movements, the quiet confidence, reminded her of something she couldn't quite place. He returned with a cup of broth, helping her sit up against the pillows. "Drink this, slowly. You were half frozen when I found you." The broth was rich and warming, tasting of herbs she remembered from her mother's kitchen. As she drank, she studied him over the rim of the cup, trying to reconcile the expensive clothes with the simple surroundings. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why help me?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because nobody should be sold like property. Because—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Just drink your broth." Clara wanted to press, but exhaustion still pulled at her. She finished the broth and sank back against the pillows, watching as he moved about the cabin with the ease of long familiarity. He added wood to the fire, checked the supplies, always keeping his face partially turned away as if afraid to let her see him fully. "I should go back," she said, though the words tasted like ash. "They'll be looking for me. I'll only bring you trouble. Let them look." His voice held an edge of steel. "You're not going back to that place. Not to Hartley. And certainly not to that merchant who thinks he can buy a wife like a horse. You heard? I heard enough." He turned then, and the anger in his eyes made her shrink back. But his voice was gentle when he continued. "You're safe here. Miss Morrison, rest. We'll figure out what comes next when you're stronger." He knew her name. She was certain she'd never told him, but before she could ask, sleep was pulling her under again. Heavy and irresistible. The next days passed in a blur of sleeping and waking. Each time she surfaced, he was there, bringing food, tending the fire, reading quietly in his chair. He'd found clean clothes for her somewhere, simple but well made, and had even procured some medical supplies for her various cuts and bruises. On the third day, she felt strong enough to sit up properly and take stock of her situation. Her ankle, while sore, would bear her weight. The various scrapes from her fall were healing cleanly, and for the first time in months, she wasn't cold or hungry or afraid. "You're looking better," he observed from his usual chair. "Thanks to you." She hesitated, then asked what had been bothering her. "You keep your hat low in town, stay in the shadows, but you know my name. Have we met before?" He set down the book he'd been reading. Poetry. She noticed with surprise. "Would it matter if we had? It might explain why you're risking so much for a stranger. You're not—" He caught himself, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that triggered something in her memory. "That is, no one's a stranger who needs help." That night, they sat by the fire as a storm rolled in from the mountains. Rain drummed on the roof. a sound so rare and precious that Clara found herself crying. How long since she'd heard real rain? "My family lost everything to drought," she said softly. 2 years without rain, watching the land die inch by inch. Papa said it was like the earth itself had given up hope. "I remember that drought," he said carefully. "Lot of good people lost everything. Did you lose anything?" "In a way." He stared into the flames. "I lost time, chances, made promises I couldn't keep because I was young and foolish and thought I had forever." Clara drew her knees up to her chest, making herself small in the big chair. Sometimes broken promises are a mercy. Better to forget than to hope for something that won't come. What if the promise maker never forgot? What if he spent every day working to become someone worthy? Someone who could keep his word? Then I'd say he was chasing shadows. Her voice was barely above a whisper. People change. The girl he made that promise to might not even exist anymore. People don't change that much. Not in the ways that matter. They fell silent, listening to the rain. "Finally," Clara asked. "Will you tell me your name? I can't keep thinking of you as the stranger." He hesitated so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, quietly, "Luke. My name is Luke." The name hit her like a physical blow. She stared at him, really looking now, seeing past the hat and the shadows to the face beneath. Older, weathered by sun and wind, but unmistakably, Luke Ashford. He met her eyes then, and she saw it all. The recognition, the longing, the weight of years between then and now. "Hello, Clara. You're dead." The words came out flat, emotionless. "Your father's mine collapsed in California. The newspapers said there were no survivors." The newspapers were wrong. Pa died, yes, along with 12 other men. But I was outside when it happened, loading wagons. His hands clenched in his lap. Lost everything in that collapse. But I survived, and I rebuilt, and I came back. 3 years. Luke, 3 years without a word. I know. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I wanted to write, but what could I say? Sorry I'm taking so long, but I'm trying to build something from nothing. I needed to be able to offer you more than just dreams and promises. Clara laughed, but it was a broken sound. And in those 3 years, my whole world fell apart. You came back to find a different person. Luke, I'm not that girl by the river anymore. I know that too. His voice was soft but certain. I've been watching. Clara, watching you survive what would have broken most people. Watching you keep your dignity even when they tried to strip it away. You think you're not that girl anymore. But I see her every time you lift your chin and refuse to be beaten down. You've been watching me. Anger flared, hot and sudden. Like I'm some kind of specimen? Poor Clara Morrison. Let's see how much misery she can take. No. He was on his feet now, pacing. I was trying to figure out how to approach you, how to help without making things worse. You think Hartley would have let you go if I'd walked in and declared myself? He'd have bled me dry or driven you away out of spite. So instead you lurked in corners and left mysterious gifts. I was a coward, he admitted. I was afraid you'd look at me and see just another disappointment, another broken promise. Clara pulled the blanket tighter around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. What do you want from me, Luke? Nothing you're not willing to give. Right now, I just want you to be safe, to rest, to remember what it feels like to not be afraid. And then we figure out what comes next, together, if you'll let me. Apart, if that's what you want. But you're not going back to Hartley. Not while I draw breath. She studied him in the firelight. This man who was both stranger and memory. He'd filled out since she'd known him, his shoulders broader, his hands scarred from work. But his eyes were the same, intense, honest, holding storms that promised both destruction and renewal. Tell me, she said finally. Tell me what happened after the mine. Tell me how a miner's son became wealthy enough to leave silver dollars for single drinks. So he told her. As the rain continued and the fire burned low, he spoke of those first terrible months after the collapse, of working any job he could find, breaking horses, riding herd, hauling freight, of saving every penny, investing in a small mining claim that everyone said was played out. Turned out there was silver there after all. Not a fortune, but enough to buy land, cattle. I built it piece by piece. Claire, every fence post, every head of stock, thinking about the promise I'd made. "Why didn't you forget?" she asked. "It would have been easier. Because some things are worth the hard path." He met her eyes. "You were the first person who ever looked at me and saw more than just another miner's brat. You talked to me like I mattered. Do you know how rare that was?" Clara remembered those afternoons by the river. How easy it had been to talk to him. How he'd listened to her dreams of traveling, of seeing the ocean, of reading every book in the world. How he'd shared his own hopes of building something lasting, of proving himself worthy of respect. "We were children," she said softly. "Maybe, but we were right about each other, weren't we? You knew I'd amount to something, and I knew you were stronger than you looked." "Strong," she laughed bitterly. "I was scrubbing floors for a man who beat me, about to be sold to another who'd probably do worse. That's not strength. Luke, that's just survival. Survival is its own kind of strength, and you did more than survive. You ran. You chose the uncertainty of escape over the certainty of captivity. That takes courage most people don't have." They talked until the fire died to embers and the rain tapered to a gentle patter. Clara found herself relaxing incrementally, the constant vigilance of months slowly unwinding. When her eyes grew heavy, Luke rose and added more wood to the fire. "Sleep," he said gently. "I'll be here." "Promise?" The word slipped out before she could stop it. His smile was soft and sad and certain all at once. "I promise. I'm done breaking those." The smoke rising from Bitter Creek was visible from 5 miles away, a black column that climbed into the clear morning sky like a prayer of desperation. Clara saw it first from the cabin's porch where she'd been mending one of Luke's shirts, the needle falling from suddenly nerveless fingers. "Luke!" Her voice cracked with urgency. He was at her side in moments, following her gaze to the distant smoke. His face went grim. "Raiders," he said quietly. "Comancheros, maybe, or just common bandits. They hit towns when they're vulnerable. Take what they can. Burn the rest. We have to go back." Clara was already moving toward the door. "People could be hurt, dying." "Clara, no." He caught her arm gently. "You can't go back. Hartley's still looking for you, and that merchant—" "I don't care." She pulled free, eyes blazing. "Those are innocent people. Luke, Mrs. Martinez with her children, old Sam Tucker, Cookie. They don't deserve this because of me. This isn't because of you, isn't it?" She turned on him. "A town disrupted. Men out searching for a runaway woman instead of protecting their homes. How can I sit here in safety while others suffer?" Luke studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "You're right, but we do this my way. You stay hidden until we know what we're dealing with." They saddled the horses quickly, Luke packing medical supplies and ammunition with practiced efficiency. The ride down from the hills was treacherous, made worse by their urgency. Clara's mount, a steady mare Luke had brought for her, picked her way carefully through the rocky terrain while Luke's stallion champed at the bit, sensing his rider's tension. As they drew closer, the smell hit them, smoke and worse things, the acrid stench of destruction. They dismounted at the edge of town, and Luke handed Clara his field glasses. "Tell me what you see." She raised the glasses with trembling hands. The main street was chaos, buildings still smoldering, people running with buckets, bodies lying in the dust. The dusty boot inn was a blackened skeleton. Its roof collapsed, flames still licking at the timbers. "The inn's gone," she whispered. "The mercantile, too. I see. Oh, God, I see bodies. How many raiders?" She scanned the street. "Maybe a dozen. They're looting what's left of the bank. Armed, all of them. The sheriff. I think he's down." Luke took the glasses back, his jaw tight. "Right. Here's what we're going to do." He pulled a rifle from his saddle scabbard, checking the load. "I'm going to circle around, come at them from the east. You're going to stay here with the horses. Luke, no arguments. If something happens to me, you ride north to my ranch. Ask for Miguel. He's my foreman. He'll keep you safe. Nothing's going to happen to you, she said fiercely. His smile was quick and sharp. Not planning on it, but I need to know you're safe. Clara, promise me. She nodded reluctantly. Be careful. He touched her cheek briefly, then melted into the smoke and shadows. Clara waited, every nerve screaming, as the sounds of chaos continued from the town. She could hear shouting, the crash of breaking glass, a woman's scream that cut off abruptly. Then gunfire erupted from the east side of town. Clara pressed herself against a boulder, heart pounding. More shots. Shouts of alarm from the raiders. Through the smoke, she could see figures scattering, their looting interrupted by this new threat. That's when she spotted them. Mrs. Martinez and her 3 children, huddled behind an overturned wagon not 50 feet from where Clara hid. The youngest, little Maria, was crying, and her mother was trying desperately to keep her quiet as a raider prowled nearby. Clara didn't think. She moved, keeping low, using the smoke as cover. She reached the wagon just as the raider spotted the family. Well, he drawled, leveling his pistol at them. What have we here? Clara grabbed a broken wagon spoke and swung it with all her strength. It connected with the man's skull with a satisfying crack, and he dropped like a stone. She kicked his gun away and turned to Mrs. Martinez. Come on, quickly! She led them back toward the horses, half carrying Maria while Mrs. Martinez shepherded the older children. They'd almost made it when another raider appeared from the smoke, rifle raised. Going somewhere, ladies? The shot came from behind Clara, and the raider spun and fell. Luke emerged from the haze, his face set in hard lines. I thought I told you to stay put. They needed help, Clara said simply. Of course they did. Despite his words, there was pride in his eyes. Get them to the horses. More are coming. They ran, Clara boosting the children onto Luke's stallion while Mrs. Martinez climbed up behind them. She was just mounting her own horse when the thunder of hooves announced the arrival of more riders. But these were townspeople, armed and angry, led by a grizzled man with a marshal's star. About time you boys showed up, Luke called out. They're scattering toward the canyon. The marshal, who Clara recognized as Tom Brennan from the neighboring town, tipped his hat. We'll handle them from here. You folks get to safety. They rode hard for the shelter of the hills, not stopping until they reached a grove of cottonwoods by a spring. Mrs. Martinez was weeping with relief, clutching her children close. Bless you, she kept saying. Bless you both. When I saw our house burning, I thought for certain. Is anyone else hurt? Clara asked, checking the children for injuries. Did everyone get out? Most did, but the sheriff, he tried to stop them. Mrs. Martinez's face crumpled. And Mr. Hartley, he was in the inn when it caught fire. Cookie dragged him out, but he breathed too much smoke. Clara felt a complicated mix of emotions at the news. Hartley had been cruel to her, but she wouldn't wish such a death on anyone. What about the others? Sam Tucker, the Hendersons. Safe, last I saw. It was the businesses they wanted. Money, supplies, horses. Mrs. Martinez looked at Luke with curious eyes. You're the one who's been helping folks, aren't you? The mysterious benefactor? Luke shifted uncomfortably. I don't know what you mean. Come now. Food appearing on doorsteps, medicine when folks couldn't afford the doctor. And then you show up shooting raiders like some avenging angel? She smiled through her tears. Angels come in many forms, Senor. They escorted Mrs. Martinez and her children to Luke's ranch, a sprawling operation that took Clara's breath away. The main house was built of stone and timber, solid and welcoming. With a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides, corrals held fine horses, and she could see cattle dotting the distant pastures. Welcome to the AA, Luke said quietly. My foreman Miguel will see you're taken care of. Mrs. Martinez, stay as long as you need. As Miguel's wife Rosa bustled the family inside with promises of hot food and clean beds. Clara turned to Luke. The double A. Ashford and... He stopped, color rising in his cheeks. Just seemed right. And what? But she thought she knew, and her heart did a curious little flip. We should get back, he said, not answering. See what help's needed in town. They spent the rest of the day amid the ruins of Bitter Creek, helping where they could. The final tally was grim. 3 dead, including Sheriff Watson and Hartley. 7 wounded, and massive property damage. The raiders had escaped with money and supplies, but the marshal's posse was in pursuit. Clara worked tirelessly, tending wounds, organizing shelter for those who'd lost homes, comforting the grieving. She barely noticed the whispers that followed her, speculation about where she'd been, why she'd returned, who the mysterious rancher was who stayed always within arm's reach. It was near sunset when Silas Blackwood appeared, his fine clothes smoke-stained but his arrogance intact. "Miss Morrison," he said, blocking her path. "I've been concerned about you when you disappeared so suddenly. I'm sure you were devastated," Clara said coolly. "Did you get your money back from Hartley's estate?" His face darkened. "You were promised to me." "We had an agreement. You had an agreement. I had no say in the matter. A woman in your position can't afford to be choosy," he said, stepping closer. "You're still penniless, still without protection. I'm willing to overlook your indiscretion." The lady said she's not interested. Luke's voice was quiet but carried an edge sharp enough to cut. He moved beside Clara, his presence solid and reassuring. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "And who might you be?" "Luke Ashford, owner of the Double A Ranch." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Also, Miss Morrison's intended." Clara's shock must have shown, because Luke's hand found hers, squeezing gently in warning. "Intended?" Blackwood sputtered. "That's impossible. She's a pauper, a nobody." "Careful," Luke said softly. "You're talking about my future wife." "This is preposterous. You can't just—" "Actually, I can." Luke's smile widened. "See, Miss Morrison and I have been engaged for some time. Private arrangement, family reasons. You understand, but with the recent tragedy, we've decided to make it public." Blackwood looked between them, his face purpling. "You won't get away with this. You'll what?" Luke stepped forward, and suddenly the successful rancher was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. "You'll force a woman into marriage against her will. Try to buy her like cattle? I think you'll find the good people of Bitter Creek have had enough violence for one day. Best if you moved on." For a moment, Blackwood stood his ground. Then something in Luke's eyes made him step back. "This isn't over," he said, but the threat sounded hollow. As he stormed off, Clara turned to Luke. "You're intended." "Sorry, it was all I could think of to make him back off." He still held her hand. She realized. "I'll explain to folks later that it was a misunderstanding." "No," she said softly. "Let it stand. It'll keep others like him away until I figure out what to do next." "Clara." "We should check on the Tuckers," she said, pulling her hand free. "I heard their storeroom survived. They might have medical supplies." They worked until well past dark, when exhaustion finally forced them to stop. The town was quieter now. The fires out, the wounded tended. Luke found them rooms at the one boarding house that had survived, separate rooms. He was careful to note. Propriety maintained despite their supposed engagement. As Clara finally collapsed onto a bed that wasn't her narrow attic cot, she reflected on the strange turns the day had taken. She'd started the morning mending shirts in peaceful solitude and ended it amid destruction and rebirth. Fake engaged to a man she'd once thought dead. Through the thin wall, she could hear Luke moving about his room, the familiar sounds oddly comforting, whatever tomorrow brought. She wasn't facing it alone. For the first time in years, that thought brought more comfort than fear. In the darkness, she whispered a prayer for the dead and a hope for the living. Bitter Creek would rebuild, as frontier towns always did, and perhaps, in the rebuilding, there might be room for second chances and kept promises. The sound of a guitar drifted up from the street, someone playing a mournful tune for the losses of the day. But underneath the sorrow was something else, a determination, a resilience that couldn't be burned or stolen. It was the sound of the West itself, battered but unbroken, looking always toward tomorrow. The morning after the raid dawned clear and cold, with a crystalline quality to the air that made the devastation of Bitter Creek stand out in sharp relief. Clara rose before the sun, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. From her window at the boarding house, she could see the blackened skeleton of the dusty boot inn, still smoking faintly in the early light. She dressed quietly and made her way downstairs, hoping to help with breakfast preparations. But the kitchen was already bustling with activity. Women who'd lost their own kitchens had gathered here, turning grief into purpose as they cooked for the displaced and wounded. Clara, Mrs. Henderson spotted her first. "Oh, my dear, we heard you were back. Such a terrible time to return, but the Lord works in mysterious ways." Before Clara could respond, she was enveloped in embraces and questions. Where had she been? Was it true about her engagement to the wealthy rancher? Had she really struck down a raider with a wagon spoke? "Let the girl breathe," Cookie interrupted, his gravelly voice a welcome reprieve. The old cook looked singed around the edges, but otherwise intact. "She's had enough excitement without you hens pecking at her." Clara squeezed his hand gratefully. "I'm so sorry about Mr. Hartley," she said, meaning it despite everything. Cookie shrugged. "He weren't a good man, but he didn't deserve to burn. I tried to get him out faster, but the smoke—" He trailed off, then straightened. "Anyway, no use dwelling. Plenty of living folks need help today." Clara threw herself into the work, helping prepare mountains of biscuits, pots of beans, endless coffee. It felt good to be useful, to be part of the community's response rather than a burden to be hidden away. Several times she caught women whispering about her supposed engagement, but she ignored them, focusing on the task at hand. Luke appeared mid-morning, hat in hand, looking oddly formal. "Ladies," he nodded to the room at large, then focused on Clara. "Might I have a word?" They stepped out onto the boarding house's small porch, aware of the eyes following them. The street was already busy with cleanup efforts, men hauling away debris, others starting to clear lots for rebuilding. "I wanted to apologize again for last night," Luke began. "Claiming you were my intended without asking. You saved me from Blackwood." Clara interrupted. "That's all that matters. Still, your reputation." "My reputation?" She laughed, but it was bitter. "Luke, I was scrubbing floors in a saloon. I think that ship has sailed." "You were surviving," he corrected firmly. "And now you have a chance for something better. Don't let my impulsiveness ruin that." Before Clara could respond, a commotion erupted down the street. A group of riders was approaching, not raiders this time, but townspeople who'd been out searching the ruins of outlying farms. They carried something between them, a makeshift stretcher. "It's the Wilson boy," someone shouted. "Found him in what's left of their barn." Clara and Luke rushed forward with others. The boy, Tommy Wilson, no more than 8, was unconscious, his leg bent at an unnatural angle, burns covering his arms. "Where's Doc Morrison?" Luke demanded. "Dead," someone replied grimly. "Raiders shot him when he wouldn't give up his medical supplies." Clara knelt beside the stretcher, her mother's teachings flooding back. She'd helped tend sick and injured on their ranch, had even assisted Doc Morrison, no relation, despite the name, during a difficult birth once. "Get him inside," she ordered with a calm she didn't feel. "I need hot water, clean cloth, and whatever medical supplies you can find, and someone needs to set that leg before the swelling gets worse." "You know doctoring?" Mrs. Henderson asked. Surprised. "Some," Clara admitted, already examining the boy's burns. "Enough to help until a real doctor can get here from the next town." They carried Tommy into the boarding house's parlor, clearing a table for him to lie on. Clara worked with focused intensity, cleaning and dressing the burns with honey and clean bandages, an old remedy her mother had sworn by. The leg was trickier. but Luke held the boy steady while she and Cookie worked to set it. "You've done this before," Luke observed quietly. "Papa broke his leg when I was 15, she replied, not looking up from her work. "Doc Morrison was away, so Mama and I had to manage. He talked us through it before he passed out from the pain." Tommy's mother arrived as they were finishing, nearly hysterical with relief to find her son alive. "They said you were dead," she sobbed. "When we couldn't find you in the ruins." "He's strong," Clara assured her. "The burns will heal clean if we keep them that way, and the leg should mend straight. He'll be running around causing trouble again before you know it." Word spread quickly about Clara's medical skills. Within an hour, she had a line of patients, burns, cuts, a dislocated shoulder, various injuries from fighting or fleeing the raiders. She worked steadily through them all, Luke serving as her assistant without being asked, anticipating what she needed with surprising intuition. "You make a good team," Cookie observed during a brief lull. Natural-like. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, another patient arrived. One of the raiders, captured by the marshal's posse and badly wounded in the fight. "String him up," someone shouted. "He don't deserve doctoring." "He's hurt," Clara said firmly. "I took no oath like a real doctor, but I won't turn away someone in need." "Even if he'd have killed you without blinking?" The challenge came from Tom Bradley, the livery stable worker who'd hunted her that night by the creek. "Even then." Clara met his eyes steadily. "We're better than them. Or we're nothing at all." The crowd grumbled but let her work. The raider was young, maybe 19, with a bullet wound in his shoulder. As she cleaned and bandaged it, he watched her with frightened eyes. "Why?" he whispered. "Because someone has to break the cycle," she replied simply. By late afternoon, Clara was exhausted but grimly satisfied. They'd treated over 30 people, and while she knew her limitations, several needed a real doctor's care. She'd helped stabilize them until better help could arrive. "You should rest," Luke said, noting her trembling hands. "There's still so much to do." "And it'll be there tomorrow. Come on, let's get some air." They walked through the damaged town, seeing it properly for the first time since the raid. The devastation was worse in full daylight, entire blocks reduced to ash and timber, families picking through ruins for anything salvageable. "It'll take years to rebuild," Clara said softly. "Maybe, but that's what frontier towns do. They endure." Luke glanced at her. "Like some people I know." They stopped at the ruins of the Dusty Boot. Nothing remained but the stone foundation and the iron stove, twisted by heat. Clara stared at it, remembering all those hours spent scrubbing, serving, enduring Hartley's temper. "I should feel something," she said. "Sadness, maybe, or relief. But there's just nothing." "Sometimes nothing is what we need to feel," Luke replied. "Clean slate. Is that what this is? A clean slate?" He turned to face her fully. "It could be. The town will rebuild. People will need help, medical help. From what I saw today, someone with your skills could make a real difference here." "I'm not a doctor, Luke. I just know some things." "You know enough, and you could learn more. There's a medical college in San Francisco that takes women now. I could—" "Stop." She held up a hand. "Just stop. I can't think about the future when I'm still trying to survive the present." "Fair enough." He backed off, but she could see the plan still spinning behind his eyes. As they headed back, they encountered the marshal, Tom Brennan, looking tired but satisfied. "Got most of them," he reported. "Including their leader. They won't be troubling folks again." "What about the one Clara treated?" Luke asked. "Boys talking plenty," Brennan replied. "Seems they heard the town was in chaos. Thought it'd be easy pickings. Didn't count on folks fighting back." He tipped his hat to Clara. "Or on good Samaritans patching up even the ones who don't deserve it. That was well done. Miss, my wife says you've got healing hands." As the marshal moved on, Luke smiled at Clara. "Healing hands. I like that. It's just basic knowledge." "It's compassion," he corrected. Knowledge without compassion is just mechanics. You've got both. They were interrupted by a delegation of townspeople, led by Mayor Fitzgerald, a portly man who'd somehow emerged from the raid with his dignity and pocket watch intact. "Miss Morrison, Mr. Ashford," he began formally. "The town council has been meeting, discussing our response to recent events. We've lost our doctor, our sheriff, and much of our business district. We need to think about the future." "What does that have to do with us?" Clara asked warily. "Well, we've seen what you did today. Miss, folks are saying you saved young Tommy's life, not to mention the others you treated. We'd like to offer you Doc Morrison's old office, what's left of it, if you'd be willing to serve as our temporary medical provider." Clara stared at him. "Mr. Mayor, I'm not qualified." "You're more qualified than nobody," he interrupted pragmatically. "And, Mr. Ashford here has offered to sponsor your formal training when things settle down." She turned to Luke, who had the grace to look slightly sheepish. "You work fast. Opportunities don't wait," he replied. "As for you, Mr. Ashford," the mayor continued, "we could use a man of your capabilities in an official capacity. The sheriff position is open." Now it was Luke's turn to look surprised. "I'm a rancher, not a lawman. You handled those raiders well enough, and the town needs stability. Someone folks can respect." The mayor looked between them. "Think about it, both of you. We're rebuilding more than buildings here. We're rebuilding a community." After the delegation left, Clara and Luke stood in the gathering dusk, each lost in thought. The proposal was tempting, a chance to belong, to build something meaningful from the ashes of tragedy. But it also meant commitment, roots, decisions about a future that still felt fragile as spun glass. "We don't have to decide tonight," Luke said finally. "No," Clara agreed. "But soon." That evening, the town gathered in the largest intact building, ironically, the saloon, for a meeting about the future. Plans were made, committees formed, responsibilities assigned. Clara found herself swept into the Women's Relief Committee, tasked with organizing care for the displaced and wounded. Through it all, she was aware of Luke's presence, solid and reassuring. Their engagement was already accepted fact, she realized. Watching how naturally people deferred to them as a couple, it should have frightened her, this assumption of a future she hadn't agreed to. Instead, she found it oddly comforting. As the meeting wound down, old Sam Tucker pulled out his fiddle. "Seems wrong to have music after such loss," he said, "but also seems wrong to let them take that from us too." He began to play, not the mournful tune of the night before, but something with hope in it, a melody that spoke of new beginnings and stubborn survival. One by one, others joined in, singing songs of home and courage and the promise of tomorrow. Clara found herself standing beside Luke, their shoulders touching. "When I was hiding by the creek," she said softly, "freezing and afraid, I thought I was going to die alone. I'd accepted it, but you didn't die. No, you came." She looked up at him. "Why do you always come, Luke?" His hand found hers, calloused fingers gentle. "Same reason the sun rises, I suppose. Some things just are." Around them, the town sang on, voices rising from the ashes with determined hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, decisions to make, a future to build. But tonight, in this moment, Clara allowed herself to believe in the possibility of healing, not just for herself, but for all of them. The frontier was hard, yes, but it was also a place of second chances, where people could reinvent themselves, where a scrubbing girl could become a healer and a quiet rancher could become a protector, where promises, no matter how long delayed, could still be kept. As the last notes of Sam's fiddle faded into the night, Clara squeezed Luke's hand and made a decision, not about marriage or the future or any of the big questions that still loomed. Just a simple choice to stay, to help, to see what tomorrow might bring. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. The weeks following the raid passed in a blur of rebuilding and renewal. Clara had accepted the town's offer to serve as temporary medical provider, setting up in what remained of Doc Morrison's office, really just 2 rooms at the back of the partially damaged newspaper building. Luke had quietly arranged for medical supplies to arrive from Denver, along with several medical texts that Clara studied late into the night by lamplight. She was bent over one such book on a Wednesday afternoon, trying to memorize the proper technique for suturing wounds, when raised voices from the street made her look up. Through the window, she could see a crowd gathering near the bank construction site. "You can't do this," someone shouted. "We've already paid fair price for that lumber." Clara stepped outside to see Silas Blackwood standing with several rough-looking men, all armed. The merchant had apparently decided to stay in Bitter Creek despite Luke's warning, and now he was blocking a wagon full of building supplies. "Circumstances have changed," Blackwood was saying smoothly. "Supply and demand. Gentlemen, with so much rebuilding needed, prices naturally rise. I'm simply adjusting to market conditions." "You're gouging people who've lost everything." Tom Bradley stepped forward, fists clenched. "That lumber was already bought and paid for." "Show me a contract," Blackwood challenged. "Show me proof of your supposed purchase." "The proof burned with the mercantile, and you know it." Bradley spat. Clara was moving before she'd made a conscious decision, pushing through the crowd. "What's going on here?" Blackwood's eyes lit with malicious pleasure at seeing her. "Ah, the false bride appears. How convenient. Perhaps you can explain to these people how verbal agreements mean nothing without documentation." "Like your agreement with Hartley about me?" Clara asked coolly. "That seemed to mean plenty to you without any paper." His face darkened. "That was different." "Was it?" "A deal is a deal. Mr. Blackwood, these people paid for that lumber in good faith. Good faith doesn't pay my suppliers," he sneered. "Though perhaps we could work out an arrangement. I might be willing to honor the original prices if you were to reconsider my offer." The crowd went very still. Clara felt the weight of their eyes, some sympathetic, others calculating, all waiting to see what she would do. "Your offer to buy me like property?" She kept her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. "I believe I made my feelings clear on that subject. Times change. Your supposed fiancé isn't here to protect you now, is he? And a woman alone, even one playing at being a doctor, remains vulnerable. She's not alone." The voice came from behind Clara, and she didn't need to turn to know Luke had arrived. He moved beside her, his presence radiating controlled fury. "Mr. Ashford," Blackwood said with false courtesy. "Come to defend your investment. Come to ensure fair dealing in my town," Luke replied. "That lumber was purchased 3 weeks ago from Henderson's mill. I know because I arranged the loan that made it possible." "Loans, purchases, all very convenient claims when the documentation is ash." Blackwood smiled coldly. "But I now own Henderson's mill. Having bought the debt from his widow, that makes all previous arrangements subject to my review." Clara heard several people gasp, "Mrs." Henderson had been struggling since her husband's death in the raid, but no one had known she was desperate enough to sell to Blackwood. "You took advantage of a grieving woman," Clara said, disgust plain in her voice. "I made a business arrangement. Something you'd understand if you'd accepted my offer instead of clinging to foolish pride." Luke stepped forward, and for a moment Clara thought he might strike the merchant, but his voice remained level. "How much?" "I beg your pardon." "How much to buy out your interest in the mill? Name a price." Blackwood's eyes glittered with greed. $20,000. The crowd gasped again. It was an outrageous sum, more than the mill was worth even before the raid damage. "Done," Luke said simply. "I'll have the bank draft ready within the hour. In the meantime, release that lumber to its rightful owners." That is, Blackwood clearly hadn't expected Luke to agree. "I'll need to see the money first." "You'll see it at the bank in 1 hour. Bring the deed." Luke's smile was sharp as a blade. "Unless you were lying about owning the mill." Blackwood's face went through several colors before settling on an unhealthy purple. 1 hour, he ground out. then stalked away, his hired men trailing behind. The crowd erupted in cheers and thanks, but Luke waved them off, his face grim. Clara followed him as he walked toward the bank, waiting until they were alone to speak. $20,000? Luke, that's insane. It's necessary. He glanced at her. Blackwood's been buying up debts all over town, positioning himself to control the rebuilding. Someone needs to stop him. But that much money, I have it. He stopped walking, turning to face her. Clara, I told you I've done well for myself. The AA is profitable, and I've made some good investments. I can afford this. That's not the point. You shouldn't have to bankrupt yourself because of me. This isn't about you. His voice softened at her stricken look. Not entirely. It's about the kind of town Bitter Creek becomes. Do we let men like Blackwood prey on misfortune, or do we stand together? She studied his face, seeing the determination there. You can't save everyone. Luke, no, but I can try to save this town, these people. He touched her cheek gently. You. Before she could respond, shouts erupted from the direction of the construction sites. They ran toward the sound, finding a crowd gathered around a collapsed scaffold. 2 men were trapped beneath the wreckage, one crying out in pain. Get back, Clara commanded, her medical training overriding everything else. Luke, I need men to lift this carefully. If we shift it wrong, we could make things worse. She directed the rescue with calm efficiency, examining the injured men as soon as they were free. One had a broken arm, the other bruised ribs, and a gash on his forehead that would need stitches. Bring them to my office, she ordered. Carefully. As she worked to set the broken arm and suture the head wound, Clara was peripherally aware of Luke organizing the crowd, ensuring the rest of the construction site was safe. By the time she finished with her patients, the sun was getting low, and she realized he'd missed his meeting with Blackwood. She found him outside, talking with the foreman about new safety procedures. The bank, I sent Miguel with the draft, he assured her. Blackwood got his money, and Mrs. Henderson got her mill back, with enough left over to see her through the rebuilding. You gave her extra? He shrugged. She needed it more than I do. Clara felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the setting sun. You're a good man, Luke Ashford. I'm a man trying to be worthy of a promise I made, he corrected softly. They were interrupted by the arrival of Marshal Brennan, his face grim. We've got a problem. Blackwood stirring up trouble at the saloon, claiming he was cheated. He's got those hired guns with him, and they're liquored up and looking for a fight. Luke sighed. Of course he is. How many? 6, maybe 7. I could use backup if things go south. I'll come, Clara started, but both men spoke at once. No. She bristled. I might be needed if someone's hurt. Someone will be hurt if you're there, Luke said bluntly. Blackwood's fixated on you. Your presence will only escalate things. As much as she hated to admit it, he was right. Be careful, she said finally. Both of you. Luke squeezed her hand. Always am. She watched them walk toward the saloon, Luke buckling on a gun belt she hadn't seen him wear before. The sight of it made her stomach clench with worry. She'd seen too much violence already, unable to simply wait. Clara busied herself preparing her medical supplies for potential casualties. She was rolling bandages when she heard the first gunshot. The sound cracked through the evening air like a whip, followed by shouts and more shots. Clara gripped the edge of her work table, fighting the urge to run toward the danger. More shots, the crash of breaking glass. Then an ominous silence. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Footsteps approached her door. She grabbed a scalpel, just in case, then nearly sobbed with relief when Luke appeared, supporting a bleeding Marshal Brennan. What happened? She was already moving, helping get the marshal onto her examination table. Blackwood drew first. Brennan gasped. Winged me before Ashford here returned the favor. Is he? Clara couldn't finish the question as she cut away the marshal's shirt to examine the wound. Alive, Luke said grimly. Shoulder wound. like he gave Brennan here. His men scattered when their meal ticket went down. He's locked up, soon as he's patched up. Clara worked quickly, cleaning and bandaging the marshal's wound, a clean through and through that had missed anything vital. As she worked, Luke filled in the details. Blackwood had been trying to incite a mob, claiming Luke had cheated him with worthless paper. When Brennan tried to arrest him for disturbing the peace, he'd gone for his gun. Fool thing to do, Brennan muttered. Man was no gunfighter. If Ashford hadn't shot to wound. I'm not in the business of killing unless I have to be, Luke said quietly, after Brennan left, walking steadily despite his wound. Clara and Luke stood alone in her office. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her shaky. You could have been killed, she said. So could you, that night by the creek, but we're both still here. Luke, she didn't know what she wanted to say, only that the thought of losing him made her chest tight with panic. He seemed to understand, pulling her into his arms. She let herself lean into his strength, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and sage. I'm all right, he murmured into her hair. We're all right. They stood that way for a long moment before Clara pulled back. What will happen to Blackwood? Trial, probably. Attempted murder of a peace officer is serious business. He'll likely see prison time, and his business interests here are finished. Good. The word came out fiercer than she'd intended. Luke smiled slightly. There's the fighter I remember. You've been so controlled, so proper since the raid. I was starting to wonder where she'd gone. She's been here, Clara said softly. Just careful. When you've lost everything, you learn to hold what little you have lightly. You don't have to hold anything lightly anymore. His hands framed her face gently. Not your dreams, not your future, not me. Luke, I know, he interrupted. Too fast, too much. But Clara, I've waited years to say these things to you. The waiting hasn't made them any less true. She covered his hands with hers. The girl you made that promise to has become a woman of incredible strength and compassion. One who faces down merchants and treats raiders and saves lives with steady hands and a brave heart. I made a promise to a girl. Yes, but I'm keeping it for the woman. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to hope again. How to trust that something good won't be ripped away. The same way you do everything else. Luke said simply. One day at a time. One choice at a time. Starting with letting me court you properly. The way I should have years ago. Despite everything. Clara found herself laughing. Court me, after we've been engaged for weeks? Especially then. Let me do this right. Clara, let me prove that some promises are worth keeping. She studied his face, older than the boy she'd known, marked by sun and wind and experience, but still holding that same steady strength that had drawn her all those years ago. All right, she said finally. Court me, Luke Ashford, but I make no promises about the outcome. His smile was bright as sunrise. I'll take those odds. A commotion outside interrupted whatever he might have said next. They hurried to the door to find a wagon arriving with several injured men, workers from the mine outside town, caught in a collapse. Clear the table, Clara commanded, her personal concerns immediately set aside. Luke, I need more light. Someone boil water. As she worked through the night, treating injuries ranging from minor to severe. Clara felt something settle into place within her. This was where she belonged, not scrubbing floors or running from merchants who saw her as property, but here, using her hands and knowledge to help those who needed it. And when she looked up between patients to find Luke there, steady and supportive, bringing what she needed before she asked, she thought maybe, just maybe, she knew where he belonged too. The future remained uncertain. There would be challenges ahead, decisions to make, a courtship to navigate. But for now, in this moment, it was enough to work side by side, rebuilding not just a town but the possibility of a life together. As dawn broke over Bitter Creek, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Clara allowed herself a moment of hope. The town would rise from its ashes, and perhaps, like the dawn itself. Some promises were worth the long darkness of waiting. Spring came early to Bitter Creek that year, painting the desert in unexpected colors: purple lupines, golden poppies, and the delicate pink of prickly pear blossoms. The town itself was blooming too, new buildings rising from the ashes with fresh lumber and renewed hope. Clara stood on the porch of the new medical clinic, a proper building this time with 4 rooms and real medical equipment, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. "You're up early," Luke's voice came from behind her. She smiled without turning. "Tommy Wilson's mother is bringing him in today. 6 months since the raid, and he's finally getting those burns checked one last time." "He's lucky you were here," Luke said, moving to stand beside her. "We all were," Clara replied. "Lucky. I mean, the courtship Luke had promised had been everything she'd never dared to hope for. Steady, patient, and genuine. He'd been true to his word, wooing her with small gestures and grand ones alike. Books of poetry left on her doorstep, evening rides to watch the sunset, his quiet presence during long nights when difficult cases kept her awake. And through it all, he'd never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give. "I have something to tell you," Luke said, a note in his voice that made her turn to look at him. "What is it?" He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This came yesterday, from San Francisco." Clara's heart skipped. She recognized the seal, the Women's Medical College of San Francisco. With trembling hands, she opened it, scanning the contents. Then she read it again, certain she must have misunderstood. "They accepted me," she whispered. "Full scholarship, thanks to your recommendation and an anonymous benefactor." Luke's attempt at an innocent expression was almost comical. "Anonymous, imagine that. Luke Ashford. You impossible man." But she was laughing, tears streaming down her face. "I can't accept this. It's too much." "It's an investment," he interrupted. "In Bitter Creek's future, in our future, if you'll have me." The words hung between them in the morning air. Clara set the letter aside carefully, then took his hands in hers. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I've been asking for months," Luke said softly. "Every day, in every way I know how. But if you need the words—" He dropped to one knee right there on the porch, pulling out a small velvet box. "Clara Morrison, you've had my heart since we were barely more than children. I've loved you through drought and loss, through fire and rebuilding. Will you marry me? Not because you need protection or security, but because I can't imagine a future without you in it." Inside the box was a ring unlike any she'd seen, not the massive diamonds favored by wealthy merchants, but a delicate band with a single pearl surrounded by tiny sapphires the color of desert sky. "My mother's," Luke explained. "She told me to save it for a woman who had both strength and grace. I've been carrying it for 2 years, waiting for the right moment." "Luke," Clara's voice broke. "You can go to medical school married as well as single," he continued quickly. "I'll come with you to San Francisco, or stay here and wait. Whatever you want. I'm not asking you to give up your dreams. Clara, I'm asking to be part of them." She thought of all the reasons she should say no, the uncertainty, the challenges ahead, the fear that still sometimes gripped her heart. Then she thought of all the mornings she'd woken to find him already at the clinic, helping prepare for the day's patients. All the evenings he'd spent listening to her read from medical texts, asking questions that helped her understand better. All the moments, large and small, that had rebuilt her faith in promises kept. "Yes," she said simply. Luke's face transformed with joy. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, then stood and kissed her as the sun cleared the mountains, bathing them in light. "About time," Cookie's voice boomed from the street. "I've got $5, says June wedding." "July, Mrs., Henderson called out. "After the spring calving." Clara laughed against Luke's lips as half the town seemed to materialize from nowhere, offering congratulations and placing bets on wedding dates. This was Bitter Creek. Privacy was a luxury no one could afford, but the flip side was a community that celebrated your joys as enthusiastically as they supported you through sorrows. "Actually," Clara said loud enough for all to hear, We were thinking a quiet ceremony before I leave for San Francisco. Just family and close friends. So, the whole town then, Sam Tucker said. And everyone laughed. In the end, they compromised on a May wedding, giving Clara time to finish her current cases and Luke time to arrange managers for the ranch. The ceremony was held by the creek, the same Cedar Creek where they'd made promises as children, now running clear and strong after the spring rains. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered by the ladies of the town. Luke waited for her beneath a bower of wildflowers, looking nervous and elated and perfect. Marshall Brennan, fully recovered from his wound, stood as Luke's best man, while Mrs. Martinez served as Clara's matron of honor, dearly beloved. Reverend Hayes began. We gather here where water flows and flowers bloom, to witness something rare and precious in this hard land. A promise kept, a love sustained, and a future built on hope rather than fear. As they exchanged vows, Clara thought she felt her parents' presence in the wind that rustled the cottonwood leaves. When Luke promised to love, honor, and cherish her, his voice was steady and sure. When she promised the same, her voice carried across the water clear and strong. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Reverend Hayes declared, Mr. Ashford, you may kiss your bride. The cheer that went up from the assembled crowd probably scared every bird within 5 miles. As Clara and Luke walked back down the makeshift aisle, rose petals thrown by the Wilson children catching in the breeze, she saw the truth written on every face. This wasn't just their victory. It was the town's proof that beauty could rise from ashes, that love could survive hardship, that promises were worth keeping no matter how long they took. The reception was held at the newly rebuilt Dusty Boot Inn, under new management and bearing no resemblance to its former incarnation. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every family in town. Sam Tucker's fiddle was joined by guitars and harmonicas, creating music that had couples dancing until the stars came out. No regrets? Luke asked as they swayed together, the pearl ring catching the light from the lanterns. None, Clara assured him, though I do wonder what people will say when the town's new Mrs. Ashford heads off to medical school. They'll say she's going to become the finest doctor this territory has ever seen. Luke replied, and that her husband is the luckiest man alive. As if to prove his point, Mayor Fitzgerald stood to make a toast. To Clara and Luke Ashford. He boomed. Proof that sometimes the good Lord has to burn down our old lives to make room for better ones. May they have many years of happiness. And may Clara return to us as Dr. Ashford, ready to tend our aches and pains with those healing hands of hers. The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually Clara and Luke slipped away to the small house Luke had built on the edge of town, close enough to the clinic for emergencies, but private enough for a newly married couple. As they stood on their own porch, looking out at the lights of Bitter Creek spread below them, Clara marveled at the journey that had brought them here, from a desperate flight through darkness to this moment of perfect peace, wrapped in her husband's arms with a future full of possibility ahead. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For keeping your promise, for waiting, for being there when I needed you most. Luke turned her to face him, his eyes serious in the moonlight. Thank you for surviving, for becoming the woman you are, for giving me the chance to keep that promise. Inside the house, their few possessions were already mingled, his books beside her medical texts, his mother's china next to her mother's Bible. In the morning, they would begin the complex dance of 2 lives becoming one. There would be challenges ahead, months of separation while she studied, the difficulties of frontier life, the inevitable sorrows that touched every human story. But tonight, as Clara Morrison Ashford lay in her husband's arms listening to the wind sing through the desert, she knew that some storms were worth weathering. Some promises were worth keeping, and sometimes, just sometimes, the frail woman scrubbing floors could become something so much more, not in spite of her trials, but because of them. The candle flickered and went out. leaving only starlight and the certainty that tomorrow would dawn bright with promise. In Bitter Creek, where the desert bloomed and hope rose from ashes, anything was possible, even happy endings. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Clara and Luke's journey in the comments below. We'd love to hear from listeners around the world.